People only show you what they truly think of you when they stop needing your approval. That was the sentence running through my mind the moment I heard my daughter-in-law laugh behind her phone camera while I stood there holding a stack of white ceramic dinner plates against my chest. "Smile for the camera, Evelyn," Brittany said from across the kitchen island, her voice sugary sweet in the same fake way television hosts talk to strangers they don't actually like. People love humble servants. A few quiet chuckles floated through the dining room. Not loud enough to sound cruel, just soft enough to pretend it was harmless. I felt my fingers tighten around the plates as the smell of roasted garlic and butter filled the kitchen. Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the backyard orange through the tall windows, and the string lights Brittany insisted on hanging for ambience flickered over the patio furniture I had paid for 3 summers ago. I lowered the plates onto the polished oak table carefully, pretending I hadn't heard her. Pretending I didn't notice the phone still pointed directly at me. Brittany loved recording everything. Morning coffee videos, grocery hauls, matching holiday pajamas. Perfect suburban family moments for strangers online. And somewhere along the way, I had become part of the background scenery. The older woman in neutral cardigans quietly cleaning behind everyone else. "Mom, can you grab the salad?" my son Michael asked without even looking up from his laptop at the counter. Not Mom. Not Evelyn. Just another task needing to be completed before guests arrived. I nodded automatically and crossed the kitchen toward the refrigerator while Brittany zoomed the camera closer. "Our live-in maid is good for something after all," she joked to her followers. This time, someone laughed louder. My chest tightened, so suddenly I thought for a second I might actually lose my breath. I had lived in that house for almost 4 years. For years since selling my own home after Harold passed away. For years since Michael sat at my kitchen table holding my hands, promising me we would take care of each other. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," he'd said back. Then, "Come stay with us until you figure things out." But somewhere between babysitting Sophie every afternoon, folding everyone's laundry, cooking dinners, and quietly covering utility bills when Michael's business struggled, I had stopped feeling like family. Families say thank you. Families look at you when you speak. Families don't turn your loneliness into entertainment for strangers online. I carried the glass salad bowl toward the table as Brittany walked backward, filming me. "Careful," she teased dramatically. "If Evelyn drops that bowl, Thanksgiving might be canceled." Everyone laughed again. Even Michael smiled a little this time. Not because he thought it was funny, I told myself. Just because it was easier than saying something. Easier than defending me. Sophie sat quietly at the far end of the table, swinging her legs beneath her chair, her small face confused as she watched the adults laugh. Then she looked at me and whispered softly, "Grandma, I like your sweater." I nearly cried right there beside the mashed potatoes. That night, after everyone finished eating and the guests finally drifted out through the front door carrying leftover pie in foil containers, I stayed behind in the kitchen rinsing dishes beneath warm water while the house slowly quieted down around me. The laughter from earlier still echoed faintly in my ears, especially Brittany's. There is something deeply lonely about being laughed at in your own family's home while pretending not to notice. I stood there staring at the sink filled with cloudy soap water and wondered when exactly my life had started shrinking into small chores no one appreciated. I used to have dinner parties in my own house back in Denver. Real dinner parties. Fresh flowers on the table. Jazz playing softly through the speakers. Harold installed himself. Friends who thanked me for cooking. People who asked me to sit down instead of handing me another plate to wash. I could still remember the sound of Harold's voice saying, "Sit with me, Evie. The dishes can wait." But after he passed, silence filled every room of that house until I could barely stand it anymore. That was when Michael convinced me to move to Arizona. At first, it felt temporary. A few months helping with Sophie while Michael and Brittany got back on their feet financially. That was the agreement. Then a few months quietly became years. Somewhere during those years, Brittany stopped asking for favors and started assigning responsibilities instead. Every morning, she left sticky notes on the kitchen counter written in perfect looping handwriting. "Pick up Sophie at 3. Defrost chicken before dinner. Vacuum upstairs before guests arrive." Sometimes she texted me from the second floor instead of walking downstairs to speak to me directly. "Can you bring me coffee?" Can you restart the laundry? Can you watch Sophie tonight? We have plans. And every single time, I said yes, because saying yes felt easier than admitting how unwanted I had become. I dried my hands slowly and glanced toward the dark reflection in the kitchen window. At 67 years old, I barely recognized the tired woman staring back at me. My gray hair was pinned back loosely. My shoulders looked smaller somehow. Harold used to tell me I carried myself like a woman who owned every room she walked into. Now I moved quietly through hallways trying not to inconvenience anyone. Upstairs, I heard Brittany laughing again. Her voice carried easily through the open loft. People online are obsessed with the maid clip, she said. I swear, older women content performs so well. Another voice laughed with her. Michael's this time. Not loud, not cruel, but not uncomfortable either. Something inside my chest sank lower than before. I stood perfectly still near the dishwasher, holding one of Sophie's little plastic cups while their conversation drifted downward through the house I had helped pay for. Do you think she was offended? Michael asked quietly after a moment. Brittany scoffed immediately. Please. Evelyn is too sensitive about everything lately. Sensitive. Such a convenient word people use after they hurt you. I looked down at the tiny purple cup in my hand and suddenly realized I could not remember the last time anyone in that house had asked me what I wanted. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise the way I always did. The house was still quiet except for the soft humming sound of the refrigerator downstairs and the faint ticking of the decorative clock Brittany bought because she said it looked expensive on camera. Arizona mornings felt different from Colorado mornings. Dry air instead of cold mountain wind. Palm trees instead of pine trees. Sometimes I still forgot where I was for a few seconds after waking up. Sometimes I still expected to hear Harold making coffee downstairs. I sat slowly on the edge of my bed and rubbed my aching hands before reaching for my glasses on the nightstand. My small guest room looked neat and impersonal, like a room in a model home nobody actually lived in. Brittany had decorated it herself after I moved in. Beige walls, beige blankets, beige curtains. Neutral tones are calming, she had said. But nothing about that room had ever felt calm to me. It felt temporary even after 4 years. I slipped on my cardigan and headed downstairs to start breakfast before Sophie woke up for school. Halfway down the staircase, I noticed Brittany's phone sitting on the kitchen island still plugged into its charger. The screen lit up when a notification appeared. Normally, I would have looked away immediately. I was raised to respect privacy. But then I saw my own face frozen on the lock screen thumbnail from the video she recorded yesterday. My hands stopped gripping the railing. Another notification popped up beneath it. Hundreds of comments. I should have walked away. I know that now. Instead, I picked up the phone with trembling fingers. The video was still open on one of Brittany's social media pages. There I was standing beside the dining table with a serving spoon in my hand while Brittany's voice laughed behind the camera. Our live-in maid is finally earning her keep. I stared at myself on the screen longer than I should have. My shoulders looked hunched. Smaller somehow. Older. The comments underneath moved faster than I could read them. Some people posted laughing emojis. Others called Brittany disrespectful. One comment stopped me cold. That poor woman looks heartbroken. I read that sentence 3 times. Heartbroken. It was strange seeing strangers recognize pain that my own family had learned to ignore. Another comment said, I hope that mother-in-law knows her worth. My throat tightened unexpectedly. For months, maybe years, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. Too emotional. Too sensitive. Exactly the way Brittany described me upstairs last night. But complete strangers could see it immediately through a 30-second clip online. Before I could put the phone down, another voice startled me from behind. Grandma? Sophie stood at the bottom of the stairs in pink socks, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I quickly set the phone back onto the counter. Good morning, sweetheart, I said softly. Sophie walked over slowly and climbed onto one of the bar stools. Then she looked at me carefully in the way children sometimes do when they notice more than adults realize. Mommy says people online think you're funny, she said innocently. I forced a smile that barely held together. Do they? Sophie nodded. But I do not think you are funny. She paused for a second. I think you look sad. That nearly broke me more than the video itself. After Sophie left for school that morning, the house settled into its usual silence again. Brittany had gone upstairs to record one of her sponsor videos, and Michael had already driven downtown for meetings. I stood alone in the kitchen wiping down counters that were already clean because I did not know what else to do with my hands. Outside, the pool shimmered under the bright Scottsdale sun while a landscaping crew trimmed the hedges along the fence line. Everything about the neighborhood looked polished and expensive. Matching stucco homes. Luxury SUVs parked in spotless driveways. Women walking designer dogs before lunch. From the outside, Michael and Brittany's life looked perfect. That was the strange thing about humiliation. Most people never saw it unless they lived inside the house with you. Around noon, I went upstairs to my room to put away laundry. As I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, an old manila folder shifted forward beneath my sweaters. I stared at it for a long moment before pulling it out carefully. The edges were worn soft from years of handling. Inside were copies of papers I had not looked at in almost 2 years. Documents from the sale of my Denver house. Bank transfer confirmations. Retirement withdrawal statements. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed and spread the papers across the blanket beside me. $180,000. That was how much I contributed when Michael called me crying 4 years ago because his business had nearly collapsed during a difficult year. I could still remember his voice shaking over the phone. I just need help getting through this, Mom. Just until things stabilize. I had not hesitated. Harold and I spent 40 years building savings together. We skipped vacations sometimes. Drove sensible cars. Paid off our mortgage early. Harold always believed financial security meant protecting family when hard times came. So after his funeral, when Michael needed help, I gave it willingly. The down payment for this house. Emergency business expenses. Property taxes during the first year. Even now, I quietly paid the electric bill most months because Arizona summers made the air conditioning costs unbearable. Yet somewhere along the way, the story changed. Brittany often joked in front of friends that they were taking care of Grandma Evelyn. Sometimes she sighed dramatically about how expensive multi-generational living could be. Once, at brunch with her friends, I overheard her say, honestly, she would have nowhere else to go without us. That sentence had stayed with me ever since. Now I looked around the beige guest room and realized something painful. They had rewritten my role inside their lives so completely that even I had started believing it. I folded one of the bank statements carefully and stared at Harold's old signature on a retirement account document. Suddenly, I heard Brittany's voice drifting through the hallway outside my room. She was on the phone laughing again. No, seriously, she said. People are eating up the sweet old lady content. The comments are insane. Her footsteps moved closer. Instinctively, I slid the folder shut and tucked it back into the drawer before she entered without knocking. Oh, good. You are up here, Brittany said, brightly. Can you pick Sophie up today at 3:30? I booked a facial appointment and Michael is busy. I looked at her standing there in spotless, white workout clothes holding a 40-ounce tumbler covered in rhinestones. For a moment, I almost reminded her that I was not hired help, that I had sacrificed nearly everything for this family. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. Brittany smiled impatiently. Evelyn, she repeated. Did you hear me? I forced my expression calm again. Yes, I said quietly. I heard you. 3 days later, the video still had not disappeared. If anything, it had spread further. I realized that on Friday afternoon while standing in line at the grocery store near McDowell Road. I had gone there to pick up ingredients for the dinner Brittany planned to host that weekend. Mini potatoes, fresh rosemary, lemon for salmon. The usual things she expected me to prepare while she focused on decorating and filming. I was reaching for my wallet when I noticed the teenage cashier staring at me strangely. At first I assumed maybe I had forgotten to button my sweater correctly or left something in the cart. Then the girl hesitated before handing me my receipt. I am sorry, she said awkwardly. Your daughter was really rude in that video. My stomach dropped, so suddenly it felt like missing a step in the dark. Excuse me? I asked quietly. The girl's cheeks turned bright red. The TikTok video, she explained quickly. People shared it everywhere in the neighborhood group. For a moment, all I could hear was the beeping of scanners and shopping carts rolling across tile floors. I stood frozen beside a display of gum and bottled water, while humiliation spread through my chest like heat. Strangers recognized me now. Not as Evelyn. Not as Harold's wife. Not as the woman who once chaired charity events and hosted neighborhood Christmas dinners. I had become the sad older woman from a viral clip online. The cashier looked genuinely embarrassed. "I just wanted to say I thought it was mean," she added softly. I forced a polite smile and thanked her before walking out into the parking lot carrying grocery bags that suddenly felt much heavier than before. The Arizona heat hit me instantly, dry and sharp against my skin, but it did nothing to stop the cold feeling growing inside me. By the time I pulled into the driveway at home, Brittany's white SUV was already there. Through the front windows, I could see ring lights glowing inside the living room again. Another filming day. Another performance. I carried the grocery bags through the front door quietly, but stopped when I heard Brittany talking in the kitchen with one of her friends. "Honestly, older audiences love emotional family stuff," Brittany said while laughing. The maid video boosted my engagement almost 40%. Her friend laughed with her. "Well, at least Evelyn is useful for something." They both laughed harder after that. I stood there just outside the kitchen doorway, holding 2 heavy grocery bags against my arms while lemons pressed painfully into the plastic handles. Neither of them knew I could hear every word. "Michael says she has been acting sensitive lately," Brittany continued casually. "But come on, she lives here basically free." Free. That word echoed louder than anything else. I thought about the folder hidden in my dresser upstairs. The retirement money. The mortgage payments, the electric bills, the years of childcare, the cooking, the cleaning, the sacrifices nobody acknowledged anymore because they had rewritten the story until even truth sounded inconvenient. Slowly, I stepped backward before they noticed me standing there. My heart was beating harder now, but not from sadness this time. Something else had started forming beneath the hurt. Something quieter, clearer. For the first time in years, I began wondering what my life would look like if I stopped making theirs easier. The following Monday, I did something I had not done in years. I left the house without telling anyone where I was going. Brittany was upstairs recording another lifestyle video, and Michael had already rushed out early after complaining about investor meetings over breakfast. Neither of them noticed when I picked up my purse and walked quietly through the front door. The morning air was already warm, even though it was barely 9 o'clock. Sunlight reflected brightly off the stucco walls across the neighborhood, while sprinklers hissed over perfectly trimmed lawns. I climbed into my silver sedan and sat there gripping the steering wheel for a long moment before starting the engine. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear. It felt more like waking up after sleeping too long. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a small law office tucked beside a coffee shop in Old Town Scottsdale. The sign outside read Family Estate and Financial Planning. I stared at the building through the windshield while memories flooded my chest all at once. Harold used to handle everything financial. Investments, taxes, retirement accounts. After he died, I avoided paperwork whenever possible because every signature reminded me I was alone now. But sitting there that morning, I realized something painful. I had spent years protecting everyone else while nobody protected me. Inside, the office smelled faintly like coffee and printer paper. A woman at the front desk smiled kindly when I gave my name. 10 minutes later, I sat across from an attorney named Daniel Reeves, a calm man in his 60s with silver hair and reading glasses hanging from his collar. He listened quietly while I explained my situation. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. The money I contributed toward the house. The retirement withdrawals, the monthly bills I still covered, the living arrangement, the public humiliation online. Daniel folded his hands together thoughtfully after I finished speaking. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "have you protected any of these contributions legally?" I looked down at my lap. "No," I admitted softly. "I trusted my son." He nodded slowly in the way people do when they understand more than they want to say aloud. For the next hour, we reviewed documents from the folder I had brought with me. bank transfers, property records, account statements. By the time the meeting ended, something inside me felt strangely calmer, clearer. Daniel handed me a business card before I left. "You still have options," he said gently. "More than you think." I sat in my car afterward holding those words in my mind while traffic moved lazily through the streets outside. Options. I had not felt like I had options in years. On the drive home, I stopped at a small real estate office near Camelback Road. I told myself I was only curious, nothing more. But an hour later, I found myself walking through a quiet townhouse near the edge of town less than 15 minutes from the water. It was smaller than the family house. 2 bedrooms, white kitchen cabinets, a tiny patio facing the sunset. Nothing extravagant. But the moment I stepped inside, something unexpected happened. It felt peaceful. No ring lights, no forced laughter, no tension sitting quietly beneath every conversation. Just silence. Warm and gentle and clean. The realtor smiled while showing me the living room. "It is perfect for someone looking for a fresh start," she said casually. Fresh start. I repeated those words silently all the way home. That evening, Brittany barely looked up from her phone when I walked through the door carrying groceries. "Can you make pasta tonight?" she asked absent-mindedly. Michael had a stressful day. For the first time in years, I looked directly at her before answering. "No," I said calmly. Brittany blinked in surprise as though the word itself confused her. The silence after I said no felt heavier than shouting ever could have. Brittany stared at me from the kitchen island with her mouth slightly open, still holding her phone in one hand as though she expected me to laugh and say I was joking. But I simply set my purse down on the counter and walked calmly toward the stairs. "Wait," she said sharply. "What do you mean no?" I turned slowly. "I mean I am tired tonight," I answered quietly. "You and Michael can make dinner." For a second, she looked genuinely offended, as if the possibility had never crossed her mind before. "Michael has had a long day," she said immediately. I almost laughed at that. Michael had stressful days. Brittany had busy days. Sophie had tiring school days. Somehow, I was the only person in that house never allowed to be exhausted. "So have I replied softly before going upstairs. My heart pounded the entire walk to my room, but not because I regretted it. It was because I realized how long it had been since I allowed myself to refuse anything. Downstairs, I could hear cabinet doors opening harder than necessary while Brittany muttered under her breath. Later that night, Michael knocked lightly on my bedroom door. "Mom," he asked carefully after I opened it. He stood there still wearing his office clothes, tie loosened slightly, looking uncomfortable in the way he always did when conflict entered the house. "Everything okay?" I studied my son quietly for a moment. There were still pieces of the little boy I raised hidden in his face sometimes. The same blue eyes Harold had. The same nervous habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he felt cornered. But somewhere over the years, that little boy had learned silence was easier than courage. "Do you know people recognize me in public now?" I asked him calmly. Michael blinked. "What?" "At the grocery store. Because of Brittany's video." His expression shifted immediately into discomfort. Not outrage. Not anger on my behalf. Just discomfort. "Mom, it was only a joke," he said carefully. I looked at him for a long moment after that. Then I nodded slowly because suddenly I understood something important. Michael did not see what was happening because admitting it would force him to confront the kind of husband and son he had become. "I am tired, Michael," I said quietly. "I think I need some rest." He hesitated like he wanted to say more, but instead he simply nodded and walked away. That night, long after the house went quiet, I sat beside my bedroom window staring out at the glowing pool lights in the backyard below. I thought about the townhouse again. The silence there. The peace. The feeling of walking into a room where nobody expected anything from me except my presence. Then I heard footsteps downstairs and voices drifting upward from the kitchen. "Brittany and Michael." "She is acting weird lately," Brittany whispered irritably. "Honestly, maybe it is time we start discussing assisted living options." My chest tightened instantly. "Brittany," Michael said quietly. "I am serious," she continued. We cannot keep rearranging our lives around her. Forever. Rearranging our lives. I closed my eyes slowly as those words settled inside me. For years of cooking, cleaning, babysitting, financial support, sacrifices. And somehow they had convinced themselves they were the ones making accommodations for me. Plus, Brittany added with a small laugh, I could finally turn that guest room into my podcast studio. Something inside me became very still after that. Not shattered. Not angry. Just finished. I sat there alone in the darkness, realizing that the family I thought I was holding together had already quietly moved on without me. The next week moved quietly, almost peacefully, but only because I stopped volunteering pieces of myself to people who no longer valued them. I no longer woke up early to prepare elaborate breakfasts. I no longer folded Brittany's laundry while she filmed skincare routines upstairs. I stopped checking whether Michael needed help paying utility bills before the statements arrived. For the first time in years, I began spending my afternoons outside the house. Sometimes I sat beside the lake near the townhouse development, simply watching sunlight move across the water. Other times I met privately with Daniel Reeves to finalize paperwork I never imagined I would need. Every small decision felt strange at first, like learning how to walk again after years of standing still. Then Thursday evening arrived. Brittany had planned another dinner gathering at the house. More friends. More wine glasses lined perfectly across the counter. More carefully staged family moments for social media. I knew because she spent the entire afternoon directing everyone around the house like staff preparing for a hotel event. Evelyn, can you iron the table runner? Evelyn, can you refill the ice bucket? Evelyn, make sure the candles are lit before everyone gets here. This time, I obeyed quietly without resentment because something inside me had already detached emotionally from the house itself. By 6:30, guests filled the dining room laughing loudly beneath hanging pendant lights while jazz music drifted softly through hidden speakers. I wore a simple navy blue sweater Harold once bought me years ago, during a winter trip to Vermont. Brittany noticed immediately. Oh wow, she said dramatically while pouring wine for her friends. Look at Evelyn dressing fancy tonight. A few people laughed politely. Then came the familiar feeling of her phone camera lifting toward me again. Everyone loves her online now, Brittany joked while smiling at her guests. Maybe I should start charging for appearances. More laughter. I noticed Michael glance downward into his wine glass instead of looking at me. That was the moment something inside me settled completely. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Certainty. Calmly, I stood from my chair and walked toward the kitchen counter where my leather folder rested beside a vase of white roses. The room gradually quieted as I opened it carefully. Brittany lowered her phone slightly, confused now. Actually, I said softly, there is something I would like to say tonight. Michael finally looked up at me fully. My voice remained steady. 4 years ago, after Harold died, I sold my home in Denver to help my son during a difficult financial period. The room became silent enough to hear ice shifting inside glasses. The down payment for this house came partially from my retirement savings. I have also continued helping with expenses ever since. Brittany's smile disappeared instantly. Michael stared at me in shock. I continued calmly before either of them could interrupt. I met with an attorney last week. I will be moving into my own home next month, and my financial contributions to this household will officially end immediately. Brittany blinked rapidly. Wait, what? She whispered. But I was not finished. Slowly, I removed several copies of financial documents from the folder and placed them neatly onto the dining table beside the candles and wine bottles. I was never a burden here, I said quietly. I was one of the people carrying this family financially while being treated like unpaid help. Nobody laughed now. Nobody moved. Even Brittany's friends looked uncomfortable staring down at the paperwork spread across the tablecloth. Then Sophie's small voice broke the silence from the far end of the room. Grandma is not a maid, she
said softly.
I looked at my granddaughter and smiled for the first time in weeks. A real smile this time. Nobody at the dinner table knew what to say after that. The soft jazz music still played through the ceiling speakers. Wine glasses still reflected candlelight across the table, but the entire atmosphere inside the room had changed completely. Brittany looked pale now, her phone resting face down beside her untouched drink. Michael stared at the paperwork spread in front of him like he was seeing his own life clearly for the first time. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. Somehow that made the silence even heavier. One of Brittany's friends quietly reached for her purse a few minutes later and mumbled something about an early morning appointment. The others followed soon after, avoiding eye contact as they slipped out the front door one by one. Within 20 minutes, the beautiful dinner party Brittany worked so hard to stage had collapsed into uncomfortable silence and half-finished wine glasses. Sophie hugged me tightly before going upstairs to bed that night. "Are you really leaving?" she whispered sadly against my sweater. I kissed the top of her head gently. "I am not leaving you," I told her softly. "I am just finally taking care of myself too." After she disappeared upstairs, Michael finally spoke. "Mom," he said quietly from across the kitchen, "why did you not tell me you felt this way?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you stopped listening years ago." His face tightened painfully at that. Brittany crossed her arms defensively beside the counter. "I think everyone is overreacting," she muttered. "It was never that serious." I turned toward her calmly. Humiliation always feels small to the person causing it. For once, Brittany had no quick response ready. The next 3 weeks passed faster than I expected. I finalized paperwork on the townhouse near the water. Movers packed my things carefully into labeled boxes while Brittany stayed mostly upstairs, avoiding me entirely. Michael tried several times to apologize, but every conversation ended the same way. Regret without accountability. Sadness without change. One evening he stood in the garage while I loaded another box into my trunk. "I should have defended you," he admitted quietly. The setting sun cast long shadows across the driveway, while sprinklers clicked rhythmically across neighboring lawns. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said. "You should have." Tears filled his eyes after that, but strangely, I no longer felt responsible for comforting him. That was the difference now. The morning I moved out, Arizona skies stretched bright and cloudless above the neighborhood. Brittany remained inside her bedroom the entire time while movers carried out my furniture and suitcases. Only Sophie stood outside clutching a small handmade card against her chest. She handed it to me right before I got into my car. Inside, written in uneven child handwriting, were the words, "Grandma, you are my favorite person." I nearly cried reading it. "You come visit me anytime you want," I told her softly. Then I looked up one final time at the large stucco house I once believed would become my forever home. Funny how a place can hold your sacrifices without ever holding your heart. That evening, I sat alone on the small patio of my new townhouse, watching the sun disappear slowly over the water, while warm desert air moved gently through the palm trees nearby. No phones recording me. No jokes at my expense. No tension waiting around every corner. Just peace. My phone buzzed twice beside me with incoming calls from Michael. I silenced it without listening to the voicemail. Then I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes as the evening breeze touched my face softly. For the first time in years, the silence around me did not feel lonely. It felt earned,